state bailouts and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher, and the millennials with me today are one millennial. It's actually Garrick Ross, but no, I guess we have two. We also have, of course, our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins, and Adam Coutura. And Warren is out, and our other millennials are out. So it's just Garrick and I and Chris doing Mark and the Millennials.
Getting to know each other real well.
Absolutely. And so first up, this podcast is called Blue State Bailouts. And of course, the dumbest bill in America, the House of Representatives and the Senate passed the $484 billion stimulus bill for the payroll protection plan extension for small businesses, but also for hospitals. Makes good sense because so many small businesses naturally are in deep trouble. They're closed. They can't even operate whatsoever because they're being closed by either the health department or the state police or the county police or their government. And so therefore, how are they supposed to earn a living? So this stimulus plan is designed to help the small businesses as well as the hospitals. This one in particular was geared towards the small businesses, whereas the previous $2.2 trillion stimulus was actually used for the big businesses. And so it's kind of interesting because there's this whole debate now that we need another stimulus. And the purpose of the next stimulus, which has yet to have been passed, by the way, is to give blue states a bailout. And also perhaps maybe give red states some extra money too to spread the money around. Why do blue states need a bailout, Mr. New Jersey?
Well, because blue states typically have higher spending on social programs, and as a result, they have higher tax policies in the state. But with government-mandated shutdowns and businesses being closed, there is no revenue coming in right now. And so they're going to be operating at a fiscal deficit for the year. And a lot of them don't have a rainy day fund or any way to make up the budget deficit. So they're come crying to the federal government.
But blue states have unsustainable pensions, and those pensions pre-existed the pandemic.
And it's not just pensions either. I mean,
and
it's rampant spending in just general areas,
sure.
Salaries for state employees. And look, I mean...
And the states are...
The states are typically your northeast liberal states and maybe, California,
and
Illinois, Michigan, places like that.
So it's New Jersey, New York, Connecticut,
yes.
Illinois, California, and to a certain extent, even Maryland, because these states have really unsustainable spending levels and also unsustainable pension systems.
And when the new, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act about 2 or 3 years ago was enacted, there was a discrepancy because a lot of the blue states had a different deduction policy as a result, and they didn't change their code to match the federal code, and so
they didn't conform to the federal code, right?
And so people wound up paying more taxes, and it was an easy revenue boost for them.
It was a de facto tax rate increase for the blue states.
And now they're not getting that money anymore.
And all those blue states did the same thing. They failed to conform to the new federal tax law, which by definition gave the state, there was a windfall to the state, and still there's not enough money.
Yes.
And of course, there's already an exodus from those blue states pre-pandemic, and that's likely to actually accelerate because of the high population count and how it has been affected by the pandemic. But here's the principle. If you were already spending too much and you're always in the red year after year after year, and you constantly have to raise taxes year after year after year and find ways of raising revenue, as they call it at the state level, which is really raising taxes, then shouldn't the principle be that we're not going to bail you out? Because if the federal government bails out New York, as an example, then the fact of the matter is it's the taxpayers for all 50 states that are bailing out New York. It's not just New York bailing itself out. And therein lies the problem, because if you live in Texas and you have a state that is fiscally responsible, your taxpayers are bailing out New York.
And that just isn't fair. It sets a precedent that every time that you never have to be accountable for your tax and spending policies in the state. Anytime something goes wrong, you can just turn and look at the federal government and ask for a bailout.
And so, of course, Mario Cuomo, the governor of New York, has talked about
that'd be his son, Andrew Cuomo. It is a family dynasty. I do understand your point, though.
And Mario Cuomo wants a bailout. He wants a bailout, but he wants a bailout for everything, for the pension system. He wants a bailout for, the lack of revenue and that has come in because businesses are closed. Maybe it's reasonable to say that there should be some assistance with revenue the revenue gap, but not, of course, to solve all of their spending problems.
Yeah, it's got to be in earnest on both parties. Look, I understand that the federal government might need to step in and assist with some of the budgetary things to make sure that essential services continue to run. Like you still have police, fire, emergency services, and certain infrastructure projects and things like that. But you have to meet each other both ways. The state has to come to some semblance of a way to cut, their expenditures and cut some of their spending in order to make the gap a little more attainable.
Absolutely.
And in Maryland, you've seen it talked about already, and you've seen it talked about in a lot of other states. Talking about a hiring freeze, salary reductions and things like that. Maryland, I know we're talking about Maryland, we're talking about all the other states together, but
New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Maryland, Illinois, California.
Certain states have what's called a rainy day fund.
All blue states.
And it's, using that fiscal responsibility that we're talking about to set money aside for times like this where they need it, where you need to make up a budget gap. And so you may have $3 or $4 billion that'll really help you bridge the gap. And so you don't need as much from the federal government. And I think this should be a wake-up call to a lot of states that it isn't attainable to just continue to go out and spend millions and millions of dollars.
So look, Eric, here's the thing. Mitch McConnell suggested that maybe states and cities, certain states and certain cities should file for bankruptcy. And of course, once he said that, oh my gosh.
Democrats must have gone
crazy. The blue
crazy.
state governors just went crazy. And we're going to listen to Mitch McConnell first. It's a really short clip, and here's the clip.
I would certainly be in favor of allowing states to use the bankruptcy route. It saves some cities.
There you go. So it would save, some cities. It would save the state. But here's the thing. If you file for bankruptcy as a state, you get to push the reset button.
Yes.
And you get to renegotiate all of those union contracts. I'm not saying that the existing pensioners shouldn't be paid what they have been promised, because I actually believe that they have been promised a certain amount of money and they should be paid that money. But those are the folks that are currently retired. However, the folks that are actually employed by the state, you need to push the reset button, as well as the reset button on these blue cities where the spending is so out of control that you actually need to have an honest discussion, and you can actually use the bankruptcy laws as an excuse as a blue state governor or blue state mayor to finally set the record straight and fix this fiscal irresponsibility.
And I think states should look at this as a wake-up call to reassess their tax policies in general. So we're talking about New Jersey, right?
Yeah, good luck with that.
New Jersey has the worst tax code rated by the Tax Foundation in the United States. And ironically,
How do you know this, Mr. Millennial?
How do I know this? I'm from New Jersey, so I have a vested interest.
You're from Jersey. What exit?
82. And so I have a vested interest in knowing some of these things. But, continuing, and you can make the same argument for New York. They're right up there, and Connecticut right behind them, too. They have absurd tax policies, and they also have the most exodus per, capita of people leaving the state because of these high
earners are leaving.
High earners are leaving. Millionaires are leaving.
Yeah.
The middle class is leaving because they can't afford to live
Those
there.
who can leave are leaving.
And so you're narrowing down your tax bracket. And so they need to take a look at this and say, hey, maybe. So you mentioned that a way to raise revenue is to raise taxes.
Sure.
And that's the primary way that Democrats go about raising revenue often is reassessing the tax portfolio. Or what you can do is you can expand the economy. And how do you expand the economy? You make it more appealing to businesses. You make it more appealing to investors and people of high income who want to come in and spend their money here. And by expanding the economy, and this is
But the blue state solutions have been time and again to just increase taxes.
Yes.
And of course, they use the soft word revenues. We need more revenues. That means, by the way, they're going to come and tax you more for anything and everything they can possibly think of, right?
Yeah, like your Netflix account is now getting taxed in certain states.
In certain
things
states,
like that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to actually tax your use of online services and the digital economy, which of course makes no sense because that's actually the part of the economy that's still working.
Yes.
But no, let's tax it anyway. So here is Governor Cuomo responding to Mitch McConnell, and Cuomo is not a happy camper about this idea that he might not actually be able to spend as much anymore. He might actually have to file for bankruptcy because good old federal government isn't going to bail his state out. Here's the clip.
And then to suggest we're concerned about the economy, states should declare bankruptcy? That's how you're going to bring this national economy back? By states declaring bankruptcy? You want to see that market fall through the cellar? Let New York State declare bankruptcy. Let Michigan declare bankruptcy. Let Illinois declare bankruptcy. Let California declare bankruptcy. you will see a collapse of this national economy. So just don't.
So there you go. So there is the statist. That is the classic statist reason of why you can't do what's necessary to fix the fiscal irresponsibility in New York State. Because a statist believes that the state economy is what drives all things in our economy. That's actually what they really truly believe. They don't actually understand that it's the small businesses and the medium-sized businesses and large businesses that are the driving force in the economy. Yes, the average person pays taxes. Naturally, they do. But the lion's share of those taxes are paid by the business community, and without that community, the state would fail to exist. But he's a statist. He thinks the complete opposite. The world's going to fall apart if you don't bail us out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think he overstates the reach that states have in terms of, pushing the economy forward, where all of our economic value lies in the productivity of the state, which is incorrect. If anything, for the last 300 years, we've been focused on localities and the individual small business. We don't go out and say that small business is the backbone of America as a joke. It is true, and in our efforts should with the rest of the stimulus should be focused on propping up small businesses, local businesses, and not the states,
non-state enterprises.
Now, do I think that we should be quick to saying that the bankruptcy route is the most appealing and the one that we should be forcing states into? Probably not. I think there is some merit to the idea that if states across the United States all just start rapidly hitting bankruptcy, that
But that's not going to happen. We're only talking about a handful of blue states.
We're seeing but also
they
happen to have
trouble.
some of the highest GDP of states in the United States, especially
But
California.
the GDP isn't created by state government. It's created by the private sector.
Yeah, and
in fact, people might move back into the state and they might reinvest back in the state if the state's spending actually looks like it's under control, because now they can renegotiate all these ridiculous contracts.
Yeah, but we can definitely get there, I think, without having to file for bankruptcy. I think a lot of these states need to take a look inside.
That would require people actually voting for Republicans in New York State or Connecticut or Illinois to control the entire legislature.
Yeah.
And that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
And so that's why the last line of defense is this check and balance between the federal government and the state government, because now the state government says, well, we're going to use this pandemic to fix all of our fiscal issues. And of course, good old Mitch McConnell is saying, not going to happen. And by the way, here is Garrick, Mr. Millennial. Here is your New Jersey governor, Governor Murphy.
Phil Murphy.
Complaining about Mitch McConnell saying that we might have to file for bankruptcy. Here's the clip.
Come on, man. That is completely and utterly irresponsible. There's no level of responsibility associated with that, and I don't care what party you're in. Encouraging, engendering explicitly, almost hoping for bankruptcies of American states in the midst of the biggest healthcare crisis this country has ever faced is completely and utterly irresponsible.
And so here's the thing. Actually, our dumbest bill this particular episode is a bill from New Jersey, but we have lots of dumb bills.
I feel so close to home now, Mark. It's like I never left.
Because New Jersey, this is the problem. When you elect these idiots, right, who just think you can spend,
Goldman
and there's never
Sachs executives.
Yes, and they don't really care about the average person in the state and how your tax burden is affecting them and the small businesses and how the tax burden is affecting them, then really what we have now is an honest discussion that's occurring at a very high level, and it's in real time for the American people to watch. Namely, that these blue state governors have been, they're just all about how much can I spend, how can I buy off all of these government constituencies, these government unions, and provide them bigger pensions, bigger benefits, higher salaries, because all things come from government. At least that's what they think.
I think a good solution would be going forward. It'd be imperative that every state had a balanced budget amendment where they had to actually had the constitutional requirement that every year they have to balance their budget. They can't operate on deficits. And if you look at it
states are required to have, they can't print money. So by definition, they have to have balanced budgets, but they can borrow money
and
they can
create
also
debt and
the other way the other way they get money, of course, is raising taxes. So I think probably a better solution would be to limit the amount of taxes that they can actually raise over any period of time.
Hey, in New Jersey, they did that, and it's one of the reasons that Phil got up on his high horse up there and and started berating people was because the previous administration before my favorite governor in New Jersey history, Chris Christie, our national powerhouse of a governor, he instituted a property cap.
Mr. Bridgegate.
Because he saw this coming, the rampant spending and the fact that, blue states typically always go back to the tax bracket in order to get more revenue. He instituted a 3% annual over property tax cap. And, states should probably look at doing things like that too as well.
You know what I find interesting is that in New York State, you have a governor, Governor Cuomo, who basically always complains about how they don't have enough money, but meanwhile, they've got the best social services network in the country where they provide people these great services.
They don't have enough money, but if they were their own country, they'd be like the 14th biggest country per GDP in the world.
And meanwhile, what he did was, during this epidemic, he has required coronavirus patients who were identified as having the virus to be admitted to New York nursing homes. And which is, this was actually a policy and of Mario Cuomo and of New York State. So let me say this again, and really carefully. You went to the hospital, you were tested, you were identified as having the virus, you were too sick to be actually put in the hospital. You were not sick enough to be put in the hospital on a ventilator and on strong medication. So what they decided to do instead is, well, let's congregate and let's go to a nursing home and have you stay there instead, because maybe you can just go in a bed there and you can be taken care of by the staff that's there. What do you think happened?
Probably all failed. Too much expenditures.
So many people have died in New York City in particular at these nursing homes. But meanwhile, the individuals who had the coronavirus, who were sent to a nursing home in order to be able to get better, they gave the people in the nursing home coronavirus. Those people passed, many of those people did, but the folks who came in and were admitted ended up leaving because they were fine, because they weren't, obviously so sick they had to be incubated.
I think that's just surprising. I mean, if you look at where all these cases have been, where the big spikes happen, it's always been in nursing homes because they're petri dishes of germs and disease, where people are just in close proximity to each other and they have no choice but to interact. And I'm surprised that they thought it would be a good idea to take people who are sick and put them in front of a vulnerable population.
Keep in mind, by the way, the first stimulus, the $2.2 trillion stimulus, had billions and billions of dollars for New York City and New York State, for hospitals and for resources. And the President of the United States sent in the U.S. Comfort, the ship, and they also built thousands of beds across New York City. And instead of using many of those beds, they sent these individuals to nursing homes, which I just don't understand. So get this, within 3 days, here's the New York Post, within 3 days, 3 of the bags were filled with the first 30 residents who would die after Governor Andrew Cuomo's health department handed down its March 25th directive that bars nursing homes, stops them from refusing to admit medically stable coronavirus patients. What? So actually what ended up happening is that they sent supplies to the nursing homes when they started this coronavirus admission policy into nursing homes, and they sent body bags with the actual PP products, with the actual personal protection products.
Yeah, that's weird, because it sounds like they just expected a lot of people to pass away.
That's exactly what they did. And so since March 25th, the Queens Nursing Home has admitted 17 patients from hospitals who tested positive for coronavirus, but in a bitter irony, most of them had fared well, the executive said. Those who have passed away
residents
without a test, those who've passed away have mostly been the residents who were already staying at the nursing home patients, in other words.
What do you think was the incentive to put them in the nursing home in the first place?
This was Mario Cuomo's idea. Not Mario Cuomo, Governor Cuomo's idea, excuse me. I'm still living off of his father. So COVID-19 has killed at least 3,540 residents.
Of nursing homes?
Of New York City's nursing homes, New York State's nursing homes. Let me say this again, 3,540 residents in nursing homes. I mean, that is awful. The failure of their New York City and New York State one-payer system, which doesn't work, and the lack of compassion for the least of us.
Incompetent leadership from the health commissioner there in the city.
And he brought down that edict on March 25th. March 25th.
We knew so much already. I mean, we knew that nursing homes were probably the most at-risk community, and he was still doing it.
We have a news clip on this. You have to see it to believe it, and here it is.
This comes as New York State has more than 3,500 people in nursing homes and adult care facilities that have died. That's almost a quarter of the state's total COVID fatalities. The hardest hit facility is the Cobble Hill Health Center in Brooklyn, where 55 residents have died. There's been more than 40 deaths in at least one facility in Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island, and Mary Manning Walsh in Manhattan has lost 32. A week after we asked the mayor if he'd sent extra medical personnel to help, he announced he's dispersed more than 400 clinical staff to 40 nursing homes citywide and additional protective gear. As for why the delay,
it's a part of the equation that we've had to learn in a new way to actually be able to be helpful.
So there you have. De Blasio said we had to learn this, and it's part of the equation of giving them all their protective equipment and more staff. We had to learn that in order for us to be helpful. Is he the dumbest politician in America to not know that when you send sick patients with coronavirus to nursing homes where the people are most likely to die, by the way, so let's walk through this. Sick patient goes to the hospital, they get tested. The patient could be, let's say, 50 years old. And they say, oh, well, you're not sick enough to be in the hospital, so we're going to send you to the nursing home around the corner so you can basically convalesce and get better. And so you go there, and while you're there, you infect half of the staff and half of the people that are staying there.
And then they go and they infect other people. And the next thing you know, you have a biological bomb in a nursing home.
And
my heart goes out to every person who puts their parents in a nursing home and makes that difficult choice, because it takes a lot for a lot of people to have to get there because, for various reasons, they need 24/7 care. They're in at-risk populations. They've already got pre-existing conditions. And you send them to a nursing home with the expectation that you're going to be cared for, that they're going to be looked after, and that there's going to be people there to make sure that they're living the most comfortable and best life that they can. And then the state goes and the city goes and they fail you. They fail you by taking this policy that it's a good idea to start integrating people into
the takeaway from this pandemic, there are going to be a lot of takeaways, of course, but one for me is that if at all costs, don't send your parents to a nursing home.
No.
Because when times get rough and tough, it just seems like those
people
are the forgotten
care.
people. People don't care.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that workers there don't care, because I think many of the workers,
I think the system
so many of the
doesn't
workers,
care.
I thank you very much. That's what it is. The system is just cold.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well,
they're just numbers. They're patients, they're numbers, they're statistics on a
They
chart.
live their lives is the way the one-payer liberals see it. Well, they're expendable. That's disgusting. I mean, it's just so disgusting. But here's a good story. Here's a good story, podcast listeners. We've got one. A good story. So Harold and Kumar go to White Castle. Well, kind of, sort of. So actually, Jay Mazzini went to White Castle. And he went to White Castle in the Bronx, New York. And he said he went there because he's from there originally. And he wanted to spread some love by giving some money to people that were putting their lives at risk during this pandemic. So for whatever reason, he went to White Castle because there are people that are still working at White Castle, which, by the way, sells, it's a chain. They sell hamburgers and French fries and, fast food, of course. And so he goes there and he decides to hand out money to each of the individuals working there. I think there were 5 or 6 workers there at that particular time. And apparently Jay Mazzini has done very well in his life.
For him. Yeah.
So he shows up. Guess how much money he decided to give each of these individuals?
A lot to change their lives.
In cash.
Yeah.
He gave each individual $10,000 in cash.
Amazing.
And they were completely blown away. They weren't expecting this. He just walks up to the they have a drive-in window, right? But he walked up to the window and I guess it's a walk-up window technically. Walks up there and says, "Hey, how many people work here? I just want to spread some love, show you guys. We have a clip on this." And again, it's like Harold and Kumar go to White Castle, but it's Jay Mazzini with
$10,000
per person. Here is the clip.
All right. I just want to bless you guys. I want to give you guys something. I know you guys work hard. I know you guys are strong. Can you guys just come closer?
Oh my God.
This is, I swear to God.
They see the money.
That's 10,000 for you. I swear to God.
Oh my God, yo.
That's 10,000 for you.
Thank you. Woo! Yo, high five, yo. Thank you. Woo! This gonna help my wife. Yo, my wife gonna fall the fuck out.
10,000.
They gave them each $10,000 in cash, and you should have seen the wad of money. It was like, I don't know, 4 inches, maybe 5 inches thick,
thick
with
stack
rubber
of
bands
cash.
around it, and it's like, I don't know where he got it. I mean, I presume he went to his bank, I'm guessing, and said, "Hey, can I have
$60,000, please?"
Yes, in cash, and can you roll it up in $10,000 increments? Because
sure
I'm
the
going to give it away today.
I'm sure the teller was looking at him funny, like, "What are you doing?"
Or maybe he had it
awesome.
under his mattress. I'm not really sure.
That's awesome. First
But
of all,
what a nice guy.
Big fan of White Castle. I think their sliders are incredibly good.
Those are the ones where they give you tons of hamburgers.
Tons of tiny hamburgers.
Tiny little hamburgers on one plate.
Yeah, they're a great place to be at 2 o'clock in the morning after some adult festivities.
So way to go, Jay Mazzini. What a great, wonderful thing to do to people who are indeed, working in fast food, and they're in close quarters.
They're in close quarters. They're working hard.
They're interacting with the public.
It's one of the few places that are food services that are still open, and
it's in a hot spot. It's in
a
Bronx.
hot spot in the Bronx. Yep.
Of course, which is one of the boroughs in Manhattan, in New York City, excuse me. In which case, you clearly are putting yourself at risk.
Yeah.
So way to go, Jay Mazzini. Good job. So who's going to pay for this economic disaster? Who's going to pay for this economic disaster?
You, the taxpayer.
You, the taxpayer, indeed. But you know what? I think we have some other ideas here on Mark and the Millennials.
Okay.
So get this. McKinsey & Company is a company, it's a consulting company, global consulting company that helps American companies and companies globally establish and outsource their supply chain. All the stuff the company needs for their products are established and outsourced to places like China.
Under the guise of maximizing profits and revenues and expediency and things like that, yes.
And this was the mantra in the United States of America for really the past 40 years in particular, especially the past 30 years.
Cheap goods.
Cheap goods, right, cheap goods.
How do you get it cheapest? You outsource it to China.
And so McKinsey & Company was the go-to company. And I got to give huge shout out to Tucker Carlson, who brought on Peter Walker, who was the former McKinsey & Company senior partner, which means he ran the McKinsey & Company.
Yeah, he was the head.
He was there for 46 years.
Oh my
and
goodness.
he retired.
Oof.
And talk about a smug guy. This guy is such a smug dude. But you know what? He came on Tucker Carlson and he didn't seem to care about just saying it the way it was.
I'm sure he got a fat check at the end from a certain world power that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks.
And how he's been responsible. He pretty much says, McKinsey & Company, this is what we did. We have a series of 3 clips from this interview. They're all relatively short clips. They're worth listening to. And if you really want to point blame other than at China, because clearly China is to blame for the pandemic and for our current economic disaster, but I don't know, we have Republicans and Democrats alike who have been presidents and plenty of members of Congress and United States senators who have also contributed to our outsourcing and have allowed the McKinsey & Company partners to be able to get all of these companies to move operations to China and elsewhere. So on the first clip, Peter Walker of McKinsey & Company says, we didn't protect our IP here in the United States. We did not protect our intellectual property, and it's too late to save the American economy. Yeah, you heard that right. He literally said it's too late to save the American economy. The same guy that has helped to undermine our economy. We have a clip on this, and here it is.
Well, look, I mean, I'm a real pragmatist, Tucker. So the way I look at it is, we as a country made a real mistake in not protecting our intellectual property, but the cow's out of the barn. And the reality is the Chinese momentum behind their economy is very strong, and containment is too little too late.
Actually, we did protect our intellectual property when we sent manufacturing, when companies sent manufacturing overseas and McKinsey & Company facilitated that. The assumption was that when a Chinese company signed a contract, that contract would be honored. But the Chinese steal. That's what they do. It's part of their culture. It's part of who the communists are as well. And when he says, so when Peter Walker says, well, we didn't protect, no, actually, McKinsey & Company, who facilitated all these deals, they didn't protect.
Yeah, so what happens is when an American company goes over to China, there is the expressed requirement that all of their intellectual property be given and turned over to the government of China. And so McKinsey, this consulting firm, has essentially been facilitating the seizing of American intellectual property for the last 40 years, or however long he's been the head of that consulting company.
Absolutely. And so it's just so disgusting. He says it's too late. It's too late. So the guy,
it's never too late.
Of course, it's not
That
too
lady
late.
has not sang yet.
Absolutely, it's not too late. And so then Tucker asks Peter Walker of McKinsey and Company, what about the Uyghur Muslims in China? What about the fact that there are 1 million of those individuals locked up in concentration camps? And you will not believe this response by Peter Walker, the retired former McKinsey and Company head partner. Here is the clip.
And one of the things you discover about the Chinese society, it's a collectivist society. So very different from the individualistic society of the U.S. So in China, literally, the way they would look at it is there are probably 80 million people in Xinjiang where the Uyghurs live. We locked up 1 million. And so 79 million people are materially better off in terms of the quality of life, standard of living, and everything else. And it was only about 1.5% that we locked up. That's how they think about it. Do I agree with that? No, I don't agree with it. But that difference between collectivism and common good is a huge disconnect with the U.S. because we regard it, always have been proud of, every human life is sacred, and therefore any injustice is something we ought to be railing against, and they're just not wired that way.
Yeah, so he says the Chinese are just not wired that way, yet he's the very man who has facilitated all of these deals and has looked the other way, knowing, he's obviously very informed as to the fate of the Uyghur Muslims in China, that they're in these concentration camps, and they're not only being, re-educated, so to speak, and systematically killed and tortured when they don't obviously say uncle.
Conform, yeah.
But in addition to that, their organs are being harvested and used systematically for medical procedures and to be sold. Sold on the market.
He says that that they think those 79 million people are living a categorically better life because of collectivism and such. But the only reason that you would think they'd be living a better life is either that they were a strain on resources or that somehow their religion was imperative on that 79 million other people. And
the religion was a threat. The religion is a threat to communism.
Well, this is also communism, where communism believes that the state is God and that God has no role in society and things like that, which is incredible because this is, we're here in the United States. Our country was founded on the ideals of pushing back against religious persecution and that every life matters on its own individual level. And he does go on to kind of try and save himself at the end, where he says, they do all these bad things, but I don't agree with it. But you're in bed with them.
But he also said, but they did that because 79 million people, are still better off than they ever were.
But I don't think their lives are any different.
They removed 1 million people to make that happen. No, they didn't remove 1 million people to make 79 million people better off.
They moved 1 million other people to preserve their state and their regime from something that they thought is a categorical threat. As if somehow being a Muslim is indicative that, you're against, your government.
So then, listen to this. So then Tucker asks good old Peter Walker, the former McKinsey and Company head, he says to Peter Walker, you praised China on their response to the COVID outbreak in Wuhan.
Oh, God.
But how about the atrocities the Chinese government committed on its own people during that outbreak?
To do it.
And so we have a clip on this. This is the final clip of the McKinsey and Company interview. And here is the clip.
They are going to get high praise. Now, credible reports suggest that Chinese authorities locked people in their apartments and left them to die. We know they snatched people off the street and threw them into police vans. God knows where they went. That's the quarantine that you think they deserve high praise for. Why?
Well, I think, Tucker, if you just look at the results, okay, so I know there's always going to be questions about exactly what the numbers are, but I think the harsh action that they took, given the scale of China and the number of big cities in it, was exactly what they needed to do to be able to prevent the outbreak from going any further. And the reality is the outbreak hasn't gone much beyond Wuhan.
So Tucker basically says they locked people, the Chinese communists locked people in Wuhan in their houses, knowing that the folks that they had locked in their houses were infected with COVID. So they either starved or the entire family died of COVID inside those houses, and which of course is proof of why the Chinese have grossly underreported not just the number of cases, but the number of deaths. And then good old Peter Walker says, well, yeah, but they were able to contain it.
That's if you believe they even contained it.
Huh?
That's if you believe they've even contained it and that they're not encountering a second wave right now.
But don't you understand
that you believe
what he's
anything
saying?
that they're reporting?
He's justifying
the behavior they did, and it's disgusting. And man, let me tell you, Mr. Walker, I really do hope the Chinese Communist Party sees this, because those are some communist talking points if I've ever seen them.
They really are. And the thing is we started out this clip series of the interview with Tucker Carlson and Peter Walker saying, who's going to pay for this economic disaster?
Just one clip ago, he says that, the way that they're treating the Uyghurs are just detesting the human life because every life matters. But somehow throwing people into locking them and welding them into their houses and letting them suffer and die because of a virus is a strong approach to containment.
So who's going to pay for this economic disaster?
I think we should make China pay for it.
Yeah, but how about McKinsey and Company?
Yeah.
You know what? How about if we look really closely at McKinsey and Company, and of course, they can say, well, we did everything legally. We did everything we're supposed to. But you know what? It would be really interesting to have a commission put together to investigate McKinsey and Company's dealings with high-level politicians in the United States of America and find out with whom they were dealing on their counterparts in the American companies and also overseas in China. Because clearly a lot of American politicians have sold out this country, both on the Republican side and the Democrat side, and McKinsey and Company has made this, of course, an art form. In fact, Pete Buttigieg, who is, of course, a Rhodes Scholar, when he comes back from England, where does he go? He could go anywhere he wants to. He goes to McKinsey and Company.
Yeah, and they hit him hard for that in the Democratic primary. I remember it being a news story for like a week because they wanted to know, what companies did you work with? And apparently he was on a healthcare provider's team when they did a mass series of layoffs and things like that. And it runs deep over there. It's the good old boys club in a sense.
But see, here's the thing. It is a good old boys club. That's a good way to put it. But McKinsey and Company has clearly used high up-and-comer type politicians like Pete Buttigieg when he got out of his studies from being a Rhodes Scholar. Clearly, they thought, well, this guy's an up-and-comer, so we're going to hire him.
They were right.
We're going to do everything we can to cultivate a relationship so that one day when he does run, we'll be able to get whatever we want from him.
One day when he's a cabinet member, because he's been promised a spot in the Biden administration, should Biden win, they have access right there.
Exactly.
Yes.
This is at the highest levels of American government.
It's legal bribery.
That people have been selling out our country. Yeah. And right now, the definition of sellout is the entire future Biden administration, God help us if he ever actually wins president of the United States. Because you're right, Pete Buttigieg will be right there.
Yeah.
So, by the way, so we're saying who else? So who else is going to pay? So the Missouri Attorney General is suing China over pandemic damage in his state.
Good for him.
So there are several others that have done the same thing. And I thought about this. I thought, well, Smithfield Foods is a pork company.
In Oregon, right?
They sold out to China. They have multiple locations across the United States. I think primarily probably in the Midwest and the South, but they sold out to China for $7.1 billion. And so you know what? Why can't we attach judgments to Chinese companies here in the United States? Because, unless it's sovereign owned by the communist government, which of course I suppose they could probably show and demonstrate, well, it's the communist government that actually owns this property. But when does it actually stop?
I'll tell you what. Nikki Haley said something the other day that I thought was really a spot-on approach to helping make China accountable. Is the second the UN reopens after all this is done, the first thing the United States should do is call an emergency session to the National Security Council and convene an investigation into China and make this not just a United States problem, but a world problem where we're all collectively looking at, China as a negative entity and the responsible.
Hold them accountable.
Yes.
And by the way, during the process of an investigation, also we can expose what liars the communist government is.
Yeah, where are they entrenched?
Because they're going to lie the whole way.
Where are they entrenched in the United States, and where can we start trying to decouple our relationship for them?
That's what communist governments have to do. Stay in power. They have to lie.
When we were at de facto war with the Soviet Union for 60 years, we would never, ever let a Soviet company be entrenched in the United States as deeply as dozens, if not hundreds, of Chinese companies are.
Yeah, we don't even know
how deep their influence runs in a lot of these higher up organizations.
And how many politicians they bought off.
Yeah, and it's not just big companies. Or like your food or production. It's like a lot of cultural things. So this is gonna be the millennial me and a little bit of a millennial story here.
Millennial story.
So I enjoy video games, and there is a company who basically owns one of America's biggest video game publishers, called Blizzard Entertainment. If you or any of your kids play any video games, they've probably played a game owned by them. During the Hong Kong protests, there was this gamer who wins a tournament, and he goes, free Hong Kong, because he's from Hong Kong and he does this. This Chinese company, this American company owned by a Chinese conglomerate, effectively bans him from competitive play for a year, fines him $50,000. And this American company took these instructions directly from the Communist Party. And so when we sit here and we're talking about,
what was the reason?
What was the reason? Because he said free Hong Kong.
Oh my gosh.
And so when we sit here and we talk about this relationship that China has with us that we've never experienced before from an adversary, where they've been so ingrained in our economy,
and we've let
in
it
our
happen.
businesses, and that we let it happen. It is not just in big things like, pork and technology and things like that. It is in things that directly impact your kids, in things like publishing and cultural activities like television and art and gaming. It is now
a complete
an
surveillance
everyday,
state.
complete, encompassing, overarching,
frightening.
Just they're everywhere. It is in everything, and it is time for the United States to really evaluate what kind of relationship that we want to continue to have with China in light of all of this. And it's going to be an interesting conversation with a lot of different philosophies and a lot of different political parties about how do we approach this, because like we've talked about before, Republicans have free market republicanism. We also have neoconservative foreign affairs protectionists, and hawks, and people
America first
and things like that. And which political philosophy do we really want to portray as the one that's vital to success in the 21st century? We want economic
self-sufficiency.
Yeah,
we've always needed economic self-sufficiency.
And as a millennial like myself, who is kind of still growing up and exploring, what I believe about certain political philosophies and what I am, because I am still young and I'm still learning and I'm still trying to piece it all together as, yeah, Mark, I am still young, but I'm still trying to piece it all together and determine, what kind of, views do I really have and really hold. And one of the things that I've had to, and I think a lot of people in my generation have had to come to grips with, is what is the relationship that I want to have between free market principles, but also, foreign affairs and national security.
And democrat institutions.
And we can't have...
Are you willing to sell out democrat institutions
to
for
communists for money? And basically, I've come to at least in today's iteration of my political views, I believe that we can't have true free markets and we can't have true freedom and equality if we allow a rogue nation, per se, or a communist party like China, who basically spits on these ideals, to have a vested interest in everything we do.
Absolutely. And I think that McKinsey & Company, good for him for having the guts, Mr. Walker, for coming on to Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, it's got to be hard to come up here and chill out to China.
But what an idiot.
Like that.
What an idiot this guy is. I mean, he literally has spent his entire career undermining the United States of America and is sitting back and says, quote, "It's too late."
Yeah.
It's too late.
It is now
unbelievable.
Too late.
Of course it's not too late.
The second you lay down and die, the second China will roll over us.
Unfortunately, it is the millennial generation. By the way, podcast listeners, this is why we are doing Mark and the Millennials, because it is the millennial generation that's going to inherit this
what you guys
incredible conflict that we have now, this unspoken, undeclared war between the United States and China.
Yeah.
And that is here to stay for quite some time.
It's always the next generation that fights the previous generation's battles.
Absolutely. Well said. So next up, we have the dumbest bill in America. It's the dumbest bill in America. And Mr. Assistant Producer, do we have a lead up?
Absolutely.
Here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
Yes, and the dumbest bill in America is prison gerrymandering. What? Prison gerrymandering.
Yeah, it is an interesting topic, yes.
Prison gerrymandering. So, as you know, the United States Bureau of the Census, the U.S. Bureau of the Census, has to count every single American
every 10 years. And
every
we are
10 years.
in that 10 year.
And it's 2020, and so all Americans are being, and by the way, that's going to be difficult during a pandemic, I think.
Say all podcast listeners.
I mean, what are they going to listen? What are they going to wear? Like an astronaut suit when they go around knocking on doors?
There's actually a lot of really interesting scientific ways they do it. Yeah, they go around, they knock doors, but then they'll also they'll knock doors on a block, and then they'll basically multiply it by proportion of size.
So let me ask you something. If you knock on the door of a prison and you say, hey, I'm from the Bureau of the Census, and I'm counting all of the prisoners who are incarcerated in your prison.
Yeah.
And tell me what their names are and how many people are here.
And then they get counted in the district.
And they get counted, and the prison is obviously fixed in a certain location.
And it's part of a legislative district, a congressional district, a state. And
those individuals, of course, should be counted, and they are counted. But they are counted as their home being in the prison because that's where they're living.
Yes.
Well, the dumbest bill in America is prison gerrymandering, whereby you can actually not count them where they're incarcerated, but they could actually give any address they wanted to. So get this. The bill says, here's the bill. It says, at a minimum, the record that is collected from the voter and from the Bureau of the Census shall contain the last known complete street address of each individual who's incarcerated, the individual's race, whether the individual is Hispanic or Latino origin, and whether the person is over the age of 18. To the degree possible, the record shall also permit an alternative address to be updated as appropriate. So the bill is written so that if you are a prisoner and you're there amongst 3,000 other prisoners, you can give any address you want as a legislative district, not the prison where you're actually living. So what could go wrong? Talk about gerrymandering.
It isn't. Yeah, I mean, you could see a lot of people start claiming certain legislative districts and things like that based on where they're from. It's an interesting concept.
By the way, the bill sponsor is from New Jersey.
Oh, yeah, we talked about this. This is one of those interesting things that we always have to generally deal with in New Jersey. We always get some interesting bills that come around. So this legislature who put this in, they're from Jersey City and Bayonne.
So the legislator, by the way, her name is Senator Sandra Cunningham, and it's Senate Bill 758.
Yes.
Go.
So we always deal with a lot of these things. Now, I will say, I think the concept of prison gerrymandering is interesting in both directions. I think it's interesting that we put them in a prison and then we put that prison in a district, and then that district gets to be counted. So I've seen it very interesting. I've seen it work both ways, from my understanding. I'm a conservative, but I do have a problem with gerrymandering, even though I do understand that there's instances of gerrymandering on both sides. But I understand that there is a history of the Operation Red Map in 2010 and all that other stuff. That's topic for another discussion. But.
All right, that was like a squirrel there.
Yeah, tangent. Sorry about that, everybody. But so back to our bill here. I think it's going to be interesting to see how, if it even passes. Did it pass?
Yeah. So
it
get
has
this.
passed.
So,
wow.
So it was introduced in 2019, and it passed one of the houses, and then now we're in 2020. It passed the other House,
and then that sounds like a bill that Phil would be really happy to go and sign.
Governor Murphy loves the bill. He has signed it.
All about
it is now law. So here's the funny thing about this bill. So Sandra Cunningham, the sponsor of Senate Bill 758, said that she wants to end the practice of prison gerrymandering. But yet her idea of prison gerrymandering is that people are stuck in this prison and therefore they're gerrymandered out of where they would normally be living. No, they're prisoners because they committed heinous crimes and they're incarcerated. So actually what she's doing is she's gerrymandering
in the other
with
direction.
Prisoners.
Yeah.
She's actually doing
She's just changing
it's a complete
who it's
lie.
Gerrymandered for.
So get this, let me unravel this for you. The language is unraveled as follows. If you are living in prison because you're an inmate and prisoner, even though you're living in prison and that's your home, you can give any address you want as your home address. And that really is what this bill does at the end of the day.
I think it is very interesting. Basically, if I had to, put some kind of policy forward where I think would kind of alleviate both of these concerns, I think we really shouldn't, and this is just generally something that popped off to me, as maybe it's a millennial in me that thinks this way, but why do we even count them in terms of allocating voting prowess anyway.
Because they're human beings. They should be counted as the Bureau of the Census.
As the Bureau of the Census. But
Yes.
should we proportion them to part of our electoral districts, or should we just say that there's 60,000 people sitting in this prison here and they can't do anything one way or the other?
If they're in prison and that's their address, that's where they are.
That's where they are.
But of course, because this is northern New Jersey, there obviously is a prison.
There's a lot of prison systems up there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's messing up legislative districts. Well, here's an idea. Why don't you, I don't know, do a better job as a politician and get these people jobs and opportunity and start lowering the taxes.
Yeah.
See, all this is interrelated with this blue state stuff of being able to let them file for bankruptcy. Because if you're a Democrat and you're in office, you can't say, hey, I'm going to lower taxes for businesses so that they can actually come into our community and start, businesses and create opportunity for the citizens here. You can't do that as a Democrat anymore. You'll be thrown out of office.
Yeah, the best way, I think, to alleviate the prison problem is to create wealth, and create wealth across all economic spectrums and all ethnic spectrums, so everybody has the opportunity to succeed. And the more hurdles and the more burdens you place on people, the more likely they are to not succeed. And then, sometimes the inevitable path that people take is crime, and it's just
exactly.
It's unfortunate.
And by the way, that's a great point. Economic opportunity. So here's State Senator Sandra Cunningham. We have a clip from her. She's the Democrat from New Jersey who introduced this bill. And she's talking about how nearby Indian and Pakistani immigrant communities help one another when they come to the United States. And how do they help one another? They loan each other money so they can start businesses. They start small businesses. They take care of their families. They're there for their families. They help their families get into higher ed and to study so they can get a better life once they come here. And Sandra Cunningham, she's African American, and good for her for trying to speak on this issue. But it really is the central issue. And prison gerrymandering isn't the way you solve it. The way you solve it is to give people an opportunity. But she tries to separate people by race as well in her statement here. Listen really closely. It's a shame. She's kind of on the right track until at the very end when she says, and we need to do that for ourselves. Okay, here's the clip.
Right. What can we do to develop our own selves and our own independence? If you go down in a part of Jersey City, down in the Indian section, the Pakistani section, they have their own jobs. They create their own jobs in their own community. They have their own stores. They have their own businesses. Anything you want, they have created in that part of town for them. It is for them, it is worked by them and created by them. What are we creating out here? What are we creating?
Well, so it's a great question. What you're creating is the blue state legislators are creating more misery, and they've been creating misery for generations because we have intergenerational poverty. And it's a great question, I think, to look at immigrant communities and say, why are they successful? Right? First generation, they become very successful, or they're self-sufficient. Why is it that certain communities aren't that way and certain communities are? It's a great thing to talk about. But the thing is when you introduce bills like prison gerrymandering bills, it's getting you off of the topic of how to really solve the problem.
Yeah.
And when you say, well, because they're Indian or because they're Pakistani, they're successful and they're only doing it for themselves. No, I'm sure they would welcome anybody to come into their community to buy from their stores and buy from their gas stations and buy their products.
Nobody's ever going to say no to money, Mark.
Exactly. So it's just, it's a little annoying because it's a little bit of the us versus them divide there, and I just found that kind of divisive.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Mark, that this prison gerrymandering bill doesn't really do anything to alleviate those concerns. And one of the things that I should point out to anybody who's casually listening is that Northeast New Jersey is about as blue gets.
Yes.
And so whether you're apportioning people based on their prison address or you're apportioning them based on their previous address, it's still going to be blue up there.
Yes.
But what we really need to be talking about is how do we spur economic innovation? And we're talking about this throughout the podcast, and that is that, blue states have a lot of spending, and they have a lot of spending on social programs to kind of affirm and prop up a lot of these communities. But I don't believe that is typically the way.
That's how you reward people in blue communities to vote for you. You just spend on their pet projects.
And I don't think that is the way that you spur the growth that you're looking for. I think that you lower taxes, you lower government spending, you lower regulatory hurdles, you allow a business to seek investment and get propped up and then start accumulating wealth. And I think that is the proper way to go
Garrick, you know
about
what? The fact of the matter is, I don't know how many people are in the prison population in New Jersey, but let's just say it's 75,000,
okay.
100,000. Let's just say it's 100,000
round
people.
Numbers are always
Let's use a round number. That's a lot of people, obviously.
Yeah.
But let's say it's 100,000 people. And you decide with this bill, because the bill has passed now, you can now populate those 100,000 people in legislative districts that are red districts and red congressional districts and red state legislative districts. Guess what the practical effect of that is? You make the state even bluer, but you do so by cheating, and the same blue politicians who have ruined the state and that are finding it necessary to maybe file for bankruptcy are the same ones who keep, cheating.
It is interesting. This is going to be one of those bills that we're going to take a look at 10 years from now, and we're really going to see the effects of it and whether it went right or went wrong. And I can sit here and I can hypothesize, but I am really interested to see how it works out.
Absolutely. And by the way, this bill, is coming to the next blue state. The next blue state legislature, you're going to see this bill coming.
Yeah.
I just know
it's going to be popular. I mean, it's states like New Jersey, California that, a lot of these real progressive bills come out and get implemented, and 10 years from now, we always see how they work out, and somehow we're always trying to undo them a little bit because they might have gone a little too far or had some real effects that weren't necessarily believed to have happened, but now we're facing them and they've been pretty detrimental.
And that's the last thought. So that's prison gerrymandering, the dumbest bill in America. And thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our millennial, Garrick Ross, and of course, our producer, Adam Katora, and our assistant producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and our website. See you next time.